Since I've pointed you towards Walter Benjamin's text on the task of the translator, and you're probably struggling to make some sense of it, I'd like to add a few notes showing my personal reading of it. Now, Benjamin's text has been haunting me for many, many years. I think I first encountered it as an undergrad, about where you are, through George Steiner's use of it in his mammoth work After Babel, where Steiner saw Benjamin as some kind of mystic Jewish hero, giving a Kabbalistic reading of the way translations fit together. And I certainly read the text then in the way that Steiner wanted me to read it. I have encountered it, though, in many different phases of my life. Particularly, I remember one very earnest, postmodern, post-structuralist, post-everything British theorist coming to me when I was in Germany and saying, tell me what this means, explain this to me, because I want to use this in my theory that translation is not reproduction, it's not equivalence, it is always the creation of something new. And I just said, well, yeah, fine, I can sort of explain a bit of it, but I suggest if you want to work with this text, why don't you learn German? Anyway, okay. Years and years of different readings, and here's where I am now. And now I want to have a bit of fun with it, so I'm going to use an example, and the example is this. It's a very well-known poem by William Carlos Williams, a long way from Benjamin, although written in similar years, actually. And here's what William Carlos Williams sounds like.
This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold.
Okay, wonderful little piece of imagist verse, getting close to everyday American language. Now, I'm interested in interlingual translation, and this is a version of it into Glaswegian Scottish by Tom Leonard, a wonderful piece. Here he goes.
Just to let you know, from the American of Carlos Williams. I've drank the specials that were in the fridge, and that you were probably holding back for the party. All right. They were great, that strong, that cold.
Okay, that's wonderful. And I guess if he reads it, you'll understand that the I dialect can be disturbing sometimes. But when you read it, you probably figure out that the specials are not really plums. They're things to be drunk, and they are strong and cold. We would presume the American plums have become Scottish beers. Okay, and I found a third version of it, which isn't to be read out aloud. Unfortunately, it's to be, I guess, read with the I. It's into computer shorthand. FYI is just to let you know, okay, I've 8 plums that were in the fridge, which you probably... Control S, love it. Control S is save. Yes, you're probably saving. You're probably Control S for breakfast. Soz. Okay. Plus sweet, plus cold, smiley. Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful translation. Okay. Now, why do we have these second translations if this text is already in English? Well, they're doing something, and they're doing something that's not done in the text. And yet they depend on that text. And I think this is the sort of relationship that Benjamin is really talking about. And I'll just go through this fairly quickly, but I'm not going to tone it down a bit. I'll use some of the big words. Now, Benjamin starts off with this claim. The work of art does not exist for a particular reader. It's no good thinking about a particular readership. Reception is totally uninteresting because the work of art is, for him, transcendent in the sense that it occupies a space anterior to reception. And this was fairly common at the time he was writing. It can be taken back to Kant, who talks about art as being disinterested, Zwecklosigkeit. Zweck is aim, and it has no aim. Or, if you like, it has no skopos, if you want to relate it to skopos theory, that the work of art cannot be reduced to any particular concrete reception or aim. Ingarden, in similar years, as Benjamin was writing, was concerned with the ontological status of the literary work of art as being concretized in each act of reception, but maintaining a status that was not simply reducible to those receptions. So this special status of the work of art beyond communication is something that was very much in the air and had been since Kant's work on aesthetics. You can find it in Eliot again the same years. That which is to be communicated is the poem itself. The poem is the meaning, as somebody else said. Apparently I thought it was Eliot, but I couldn't find it. The work of art is there, can be received by many different people and concretized and gains meaning in that reception, but it has its own anterior space. And this is very important for Benjamin because it means that translations then can be seen as being more communicative because they are intended for a particular reader. He just says, by definition, a translation exists for somebody who can't read the original, therefore they are closer to the actual specificities of reception and closer to communication, whereas the work of art is for Benjamin in a space prior to communication. This is fine, but there's a trick that I use. Sometimes I would get these texts, and we can say, yes, this contains something and that depends on it, and this is very specific because it's meant for the person who has an interest of some kind in Glaswegian Scottish, and this again directs itself to a person who is able to read computer shorthand and to somebody who will enjoy the tension between these different versions of English, but this is definitely the anterior text from which the others come. Why? Because if this were not such a famous poem, this one would not make any sense at all or have any interest. However, a trick I do in some classes is reverse the two. I could, for example, take this poem and present it as an original and present that one as the translation. And we get students to criticize the translation. Now, in this case, I'm not too sure it would work because the Glaswegian is fairly opaque, but I'm always amazed that when I present that, I present an original poem as if it were a translation. Students are very, very apt to find fault with it. It's not as good as the original. And the best text is always going to be, always, in the classes that I give, the best text is the one that occupies this position, no matter whether it is a translation or an original text. It's the way you present it, and it activates these presuppositions that we have about translations. And I think those presuppositions constitute what Benjamin calls a form. He says translation is a form in the Stephen Rendall translation of Benjamin's text. In the Harry Zohn translation, I think he says translation is a mode, which is a little bit upsetting. In German, it's very, übersetzen? Übersetzung ist ein Form. It's very clear. So these presuppositions seem to me what Benjamin is drawing out. And this also concerns the second idea that is there, writ large, the translation is not really separate from the text, and it's not the death of the text, it extends the life of the text. And this is good because it justifies translations doing something different from what is in the original, but nevertheless, with the original, extending it out into the world. The life metaphor is played with here on several different registers, and Jacques Derrida played on this particular part of Benjamin very much when he was obsessed with his own death and concerned with the possibility of survival, of having an afterlife. Life in this metaphor is a process of constant change, so the translation can change what is in the text and add to it and extend to it, and yet maintain identity, since the conditions of translatability, Benjamin says, are in the original. If the translation can do it, it's because the original has the resources to permit it. The fact of identity over change is as old as Aristotle, when the acorn is the oak, even though they have different forms. One becomes the other. What Benjamin is saying here is very close to other theories that talk about the transmigration of spirit, that something that is in the text is moved and extended through its repercussions in the world, that is, its translations and receptions, or even the Greek idea that a person is alive as long as the name is remembered. I'm intrigued here at something that Andrew Chesterman brought out when he said that perhaps we're not dealing with equivalence because equivalence is reciprocal. And here, at least in Benjamin, we can see there is no symmetry between translation status and original status. There is a very marked and dynamic asymmetry. And that instead of equivalence, we might talk about similarity, that the translation is similar to the original, which implies there is some difference. But it also implies a directionality, which you might like to play with. We can say that a daughter is like her mother, or the daughter resembles the mother, okay? But can you really say that the mother is like the daughter, or the mother resembles the daughter? Not really, I suggest. That the notion of similarity, just in common usage, has an asymmetry and directionality which gives primal status to one side of the equation, and that is the original. So perhaps what Benjamin is doing here in this quite stunning metaphor of afterlife is just giving words to something that we do quite commonly when we talk about similarity, for example. The third thing I want to bring out of the essay is the relation between different languages, and Benjamin at various stages sees the different languages as being parts of a more original language, which fits in with the kind of historical linguistics that have been done since the beginning of the 19th century. So we have fragmented languages which are only parts of the whole, and therefore part of the work of translation is to put together the pieces, the fragments of the broken vessel, is the metaphor there. And that's all very appealing. And he gives an example, and it's good to have examples, so let's stick with this one. The word Brot, the German for bread, means something different to a German than the word pain to a Frenchman. These words are not interchangeable for them. In fact, they strive to exclude each other. And then in the next breath, Benjamin says, absolute aufgenommen, in the absolute, or taken in the absolute, they nevertheless refer to the same thing. So there is a sameness and a difference that is operative here. But most commentators emphasize the difference, the fact that you can have the same word being translatable, but the experience of bread is quite different. We can see this in the example I started off with, where the plums that are the object of desire for the American become the cold beers, I think, for Tom Leonard in Glasgow. Okay, the same thing is there. It's occupying the same has the same function in the poem, but is embodied in a different way. Or the common language, which was so dear to William Carlos Williams, becomes computer shorthand, which is perhaps the common language of a different generation. So you can see this thing of the sameness being there and the cultural difference overriding it. I want to play with it, though. I mean, yes, there are all different kinds of bread, and bread just ain't bread when you're eating it, or when you're desiring it, or when you feel the comforts of your home bread that your mother used to make if you were so lucky, or that you used to have in your particular home country. Okay, now what's happening though for me is that Benjamin wrote this text as a preface to his translations of Baudelaire. And so what I did, I went through the text of Baudelaire, not just the whole Fleur du Mal, and I found that the term bread, pain, only appears twice in two poems, okay, or once in each of these poems. The first, La Muse Vénale, the French is pour gagner ton pain de chaque soir, and that's to earn your daily bread. You know where that comes from? That's right, it comes from the Lord's Prayer. And I just Googled the images for that, and it's pure Lord's Prayer Christian culture. Same in German, same in French, both good Christian cultures. No problem translating it, Walter. In this case, it refers to what is said in the Lord's Prayer, and the Bible is common to both cultures. And the other usage was this one, La Bénédiction, le pain et le vin destiné sa bouche, the bread and wine that were destined for your mouth. Okay, the bread and the wine, where is bread and wine taken? In a benediction. It's the Mass, okay, it's the communion. And I Google that, and obviously I get images of the Christian communion. What I'm trying to say is that despite all the claims to fragmented cultures and separated languages and things being pieced together, the example tells you that the translational act here was facilitated by a shared Christian culture. And I want to go further. I want to say that Benjamin's translation form, in its insistence on a transcendent original, like the Word of God, for example, in its play on the metaphors of extending life through a life-giving spirit, and indeed in its portrayal of the translation as an inferior and contingent present, which can only look back and draw on the superior original status. All of those things are, for me, Judeo-Christian culture. This is part of the ideologies that the churches, the various churches that we have transmitted to us. And it makes us think about translation in those forms. This, I think, is for me the prototypical Western translation form. And believe me, it's not hard to go into some other culture, into Australian indigenous cultures, into Asian cultures, Southeast Asian cultures, oral cultures, African cultures. You will find very, very different notions of translation at work. So translation is a form, said Benjamin. No, I would say the Judeo-Christian translation is one form among many. So many thanks for tackling the text. Let's hope we can do better.